Cymbeline. By William Shakespeare. Cymbeline, also known as the Tragedie of Cymbeline or Cymbeline, King of Britain, is a play by William Shakespeare set in ancient Britain, circa 10 to 14, and based on legends that formed part of the matter of Britain concerning the early Celtic British King Cunobeline. Although listed as a tragedy in the First Folio, modern critics often classify Cymbeline as a romance or even a comedy. Like Othello and The Winter's Tale, it deals with the themes of innocence and jealousy. While the precise date of composition remains unknown, the play was certainly produced as early as 1611. Cymbeline. During the time of Augustus Caesar, Emperor of Rome, there reigned in England, which was then called Britain, a king whose name was Cymbeline. Cymbeline's first wife died when his 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, were very young. Imogen, the eldest of these children, was brought up in her father's court, but by a strange chance the 2 sons of Cymbeline were stolen out of their nursery when the eldest was but 3 years of age and the youngest quite an infant, and Cymbeline could never discover what was become of them or by whom they were conveyed away. Cymbeline was twice married. His second wife was a wicked, plotting woman, and a cruel stepmother to Imogen, Cymbeline's daughter by his first wife. The queen, though she hated Imogen, yet wished her to marry a son of her own by a former husband, she also having been twice married, for by this means she hoped upon the death of Cymbeline to place the crown of Britain upon the head of her son Claudin, for she knew that, if the king's sons were not found, the Princess Imogen must be the king's heir. But this design was prevented by Imogen herself, who married without the consent or even knowledge of her father or the queen. Posthumus, for that was the name of Imogen's husband, was the best scholar and most accomplished gentleman of that age. His father died fighting in the wars for Cymbeline, and soon after his birth his mother died also for grief at the loss of her husband. Cymbeline, pitying the helpless state of this orphan, took Posthumus, Cymbeline having given him that name because he was born after his father's death, and educated him in his own court. Imogen and Posthumus were both taught by the same masters, and were playfellows from their infancy. They loved each other tenderly when they were children, and, their affection continuing to increase with their years, when they grew up they privately married. The disappointed queen soon learned this secret, for she kept spies constantly in watch upon the actions of her stepdaughter, and she immediately told the king of the marriage of Imogen with Posthumus. Nothing could exceed the wrath of Cymbeline when he heard that his daughter had been so forgetful of her high dignity as to marry a subject. He commanded Posthumus to leave Britain and banished him from his native country forever. The queen, who pretended to pity Imogen for the grief she suffered at losing her husband, offered to procure them a private meeting before Posthumus set out on his journey to Rome, which place he had chosen for his residence in his banishment. This seeming kindness she showed the better to succeed in her future designs in regard to her son Claudin, for she meant to persuade Imogen, when her husband was gone, that her marriage was not lawful, being contracted without the consent of the king. Imogen and Posthumus took a most affectionate leave of each other. Imogen gave her husband a diamond ring which had been her mother's, and Posthumus promised never to part with the ring, and he fastened a bracelet on the arm of his wife, which he begged she would preserve with great care, as a token of his love. They then bade each other farewell, with many vows of everlasting love and fidelity. Imogen remained a solitary and dejected lady in her father's court, and Posthumus arrived at Rome, the place he had chosen for his banishment. Posthumus fell into company at Rome with some gay young men of different nations, who were talking freely of ladies, each one praising the ladies of his own country and his own mistress. Posthumus, who had ever his own dear lady in his mind, affirmed that his wife, the fair Imogen, was the most virtuous, wise, and constant lady in the world. One of those gentlemen, whose name was Iachimo, being offended that a lady of Britain should be so praised above the Roman ladies, his countrywomen, provoked Posthumus by seeming to doubt the constancy of his so highly praised wife, and at length, after much altercation, Posthumus consented to a proposal of Iachimo's that he, Iachimo, should go to Britain and endeavor to gain the love of the married Imogen. They then laid a wager that if Iachimo did not succeed in this wicked design he was to forfeit a large sum of money, but if he could win Imogen's favor, and prevail upon her to give him the bracelet which Posthumus had so earnestly desired she would keep as a token of his love, then the wager was to terminate with Posthumus giving to Iachimo the ring which was Imogen's love present when she parted with her husband. Such firm faith had Posthumus in the fidelity of Imogen that he thought he ran no hazard in this trial of her honor. Iachimo, on his arrival in Britain, gained admittance and a courteous welcome from Imogen, as a friend of her husband, but when he began to make professions of love to her she repulsed him with disdain, and he soon found that he could have no hope of succeeding in his dishonorable design. The desire Iachimo had to win the wager made him now have recourse to a stratagem to impose upon Posthumus, and for this purpose he bribed some of Imogen's attendants and was by them conveyed into her bedchamber, concealed in a large trunk, where he remained shut up till Imogen was retired to rest and had fallen asleep, and then, getting out of the trunk, he examined the chamber with great attention, and wrote down everything he saw there, and particularly noticed a mole which he observed upon Imogen's neck, and then softly unloosing the bracelet from her arm, which Posthumus had given to her, he retired into the chest again, and the next day he set off for Rome with great expedition, and boasted to Posthumus that Imogen had given him the bracelet, and likewise permitted him to pass a night in her chamber. And in this manner Iachimo told his false tale. Her bedchamber, said he, was hung with tapestry of silk and silver. The story was the proud Cleopatra when she met her Anthony, a piece of work most bravely wrought. This is true, said Posthumus, but this you might have heard spoken of without seeing. Then the chimney, said Iachimo, is south of the chamber, and the chimney-piece is Diana bathing. Never saw I figures livelier expressed. This is a thing you might have likewise heard, said Posthumus, for it is much talked of. Iachimo as accurately described the roof of the chamber, and added, I had almost forgot her andirons, they were 2 winking cupids made of silver, each on 1 foot standing. He then took out the bracelet, and said, Know you this jewel, sir? She gave me this. She took it from her arm. I see her yet, her pretty action did outsell her gift, and yet enriched it, too. She gave it me, and said, she prized it once. He last of all described the mole he had observed upon her neck. Posthumus, who had heard the whole of this artful recital in an agony of doubt, now broke out into the most passionate exclamations against Imogen. He delivered up the diamond ring to Iachimo which he had agreed to forfeit to him if he obtained the bracelet from Imogen. Posthumus then in a jealous rage wrote to Pisanio, a gentleman of Britain, who was one of Imogen's attendants, and had long been a faithful friend to Posthumus, and after telling him what proof he had of his wife's disloyalty, he desired Pisanio would take Imogen to Milford Haven, a seaport of Wales, and there kill her. And at the same time he wrote a deceitful letter to Imogen, desiring her to go with Pisanio, for that, finding he could live no longer without seeing her, though he was forbidden upon pain of death to return to Britain, he would come to Milford Haven, at which place he begged she would meet him. She, good, unsuspecting lady, who loved her husband above all things, and desired more than her life to see him, hastened her departure with Pisanio, and the same night she received the letter she set out. When their journey was nearly at an end, Pisanio, who, though faithful to Posthumus, was not faithful to serve him in an evil deed, disclosed to Imogen the cruel order he had received. Imogen, who, instead of meeting a loving and beloved husband, found herself doomed by that husband to suffer death, was afflicted beyond measure. Pisanio persuaded her to take comfort and wait with patient fortitude for the time when Posthumus should see and repent his injustice. In the meantime, as she refused in her distress to return to her father's court, he advised her to dress herself in boy's clothes for more security in traveling, to which advice she agreed, and thought in that disguise she would go over to Rome and see her husband, whom, though he had used her so barbarously, she could not forget to love. When Pisanio had provided her with her new apparel, he left her to her uncertain fortune, being obliged to return to court, but before he departed he gave her a vial of cordial, which he said the queen had given him as a sovereign remedy in all disorders. The queen, who hated Pisanio because he was a friend to Imogen and Posthumus, gave him this vial, which she supposed contained poison, she having ordered her physician to give her some poison, to try its effects, as she said, upon